Welcome back. We're about to start chapters 12 and 13, and something interesting happens, so stay tuned. Again, Stanley was the last to finish digging. It was late afternoon when he dragged himself back to the compound. This time he would have accepted a ride on the truck if it was offered. When he got to the tent, he found Mr. Pandowski and the other boys sitting around in a circle on the ground. "Welcome, Stanley," said Mr. Pandowski. "Hey, caveman, you get your hole dug?" asked Maggot. He managed to nod. "You spit in it?" asked Squid. He nodded again. "You're right," he said to X-Ray. "The second hole is the hardest." X-Ray shook his head. "The third hole's the hardest," he said. "Come join our circle," said Mr. Pandowski. Stanley plopped down between Squid and Maggot. He needed to rest before taking a shower. "We've been discussing what you want to do with your lives," said Mr. Pandowski. "We're not going to be at Camp Green Lake forever. We need to prepare for the day we leave here and join the rest of society." "Hey, that's great, Mom," said Maggot. "They're going to finally let you out of here?" The other boys laughed. "Okay, Jose," said Mr. Pandowski. "What do you want to do with your life?" "I don't know," said Maggot. "You need to think about it," said Mr. Pandowski. "It's important to have goals. Otherwise, you're going to end up right back in jail." "What do you like to do?" "I don't know," said Maggot. "You must like something," said Mr. Pandowski. "I like animals," said Maggot. "Good," said Mr. Pandowski. "Does anyone know of a job that involves animals?" "Veterinarian," said Armpit. "That's right," Mr. Pandowski said. "He could work in a zoo," said Zigzag. "He belongs in the zoo," said Squid, and he and X-Ray laughed. "How about you, Stanley? Any ideas for Jose?" Stanley sighed. "Animal trainer?" he said. "Like for the circus or movies or something like that?" "Any of those jobs sound interesting to you, Jose?" asked Mr. Pandowski. "Yeah, I like what Caveman said about training animals for the movies. I think it would be fun to train monkeys." X-Ray laughed. "Don't laugh, Rex," said Mr. Pandowski. "We don't laugh at people's dreams. Someone is going to have to train monkeys for the movies." "Who are you kidding, Mom?" asked X-Ray. "Maggot's never going to be a monkey trainer." "You don't know that," said Mr. Pandowski. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy. But that's no reason to give up. You'll be surprised what you can accomplish if you set your mind to it. After all, you only have one life, so you should try to make the most of it." Stanley tried to figure out what he'd say if Mr. Pandowski asked him what he wanted to do with his life. He used to want to work for the FBI, but that didn't seem to be appropriate to mention that. "So far you've all done pretty good at messing up your lives," said Mr. Pandowski. "I know you think you're cool." He looked at Stanley. "So you're caveman now, huh? You like digging holes, caveman?" Stanley didn't know what to say. "Well, let me tell you something, caveman. You are here on account of one person. If it wasn't for that person, you wouldn't be here digging holes in the hot sun. You know who that person is?" "My no good, dirty, rotten, pig stealing great great grandfather?" The other boys howled with laughter. Even Zero smiled. It was the first time Stanley had ever seen Zero smile. He usually had such an angry expression on his face. Now that he had such a huge smile, it almost seemed too big for his face, like what you'd see on a jack-o'-lantern. "No," said Mr. Pandowski. "The person is you, Stanley. You're the reason you're here. You are responsible for yourself. You messed up your life, and it's up to you to fix it. No one else is going to do that for you. For any of you." Mr. Pandowski looked from one boy to another. "You're all special in your own way," he said. "You've all got something to offer. You have to think about what you're going to do, then do it. Even you, Zero, you're not completely worthless." The smile was now gone from Zero's face. "What do you want to do with your life?" Mr. Pandowski asked him. Zero's mouth was shut tight as he glared at Mr. Pandowski. His dark eyes seemed to expand. "What about it, Zero? What do you want to do? What do you like to do?" "I like to dig holes." And that's where we end chapter 12. But we're going to go ahead and read another chapter because it is starting to get good. All too soon, Stanley was back at the lake, sticking his shovel into the dirt. X-Ray was right. The third hole was the hardest. So was the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and his shovel hit the dirt. After a while, he lost track of the day of the week and how many holes he'd actually dug. It all seemed like one big hole, and it would take a year and a half to dig it. He guessed he'd lost at least 5 pounds. He figured that in a year and a half, he'd either be in great physical condition or dead. He dug his shovel into the dirt. It couldn't always be this hot, he thought. Surely it would be cooler in December. Maybe then they froze. He dug his shovel into the dirt. His skin got tougher. It didn't hurt as much to hold the shovel. As he drank from his canteen, he looked up at the sky. A cloud had appeared earlier that day. It was the first cloud he could remember seeing since arriving at Camp Green Lake. He and the other boys had been watching it all day, hoping it would move closer to be in front of the sun. Occasionally it got close, but it was just teasing them. His hole was waist deep. His shovel hit into the dirt. As he dumped it out, he thought he saw something glisten, as if it fell onto the dirt pile. Whatever it was quickly buried. Stanley stared at the pile a moment, unsure if he had even seen anything. Even if it was something, what good would it do him? He promised he'd have to give it to X-Ray. It didn't seem worth the effort to climb out of his hole to check it out. He glanced up at that cloud, which was close enough to the sun that he had to squint to look at it. He dug his shovel back into the earth, scooped out some more dirt, and lifted out another dirt pile. But instead of dumping it there, he tossed it off to the side. His curiosity had gotten to him. He climbed out of his hole and sifted his fingers through that pile. He felt something hard and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a gold tube, as long and as wide as the second finger on his right hand. The tube was open at one end and closed at the other. He used a few drops of his precious water to clean it. There seemed to be some kind of design on it. He poured a few more drops of water and rubbed it on the side of his pants pocket. He looked again at the design engraved into the bottom of the tube. He could see an outline of a heart with the letters KB etched in it. He tried to figure out some way that he wouldn't have to give it to X-Ray. He could just keep it, but that wouldn't do him any good. He wanted a day off. He looked at the large pile of dirt near where X-Ray was digging. X-Ray was probably almost finished for the day. Getting the rest of the day off would hardly do him much good. X-Ray would first have to show the tube to Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski, who would then have to show it to the warden. But then X-Ray would be done anyway. Stanley wondered about trying to secretly take the tube directly to the warden. He could explain the situation to the warden, and the warden might make an excuse for giving him the day off, so that X-Ray wouldn't expect anything. He looked across the lake toward the cabin under the 2 oak trees. The place scared him. He'd been at Camp Green Lake almost 2 weeks, and he still hadn't met the warden. That was just as well. If he could go his entire year and a half without seeing the warden, that would be fine with him. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. He looked at it again. It looked familiar. He thought he'd seen something like it somewhere before, but he couldn't quite place it. "What do you got there, caveman?" asked Zigzag. Stanley's large hand closed around the tube. "Nothing, just, it's useless. I think I might have found something like another fossil." "No, I'm not sure what it is. Let me see it," said Zigzag. Instead of showing it to Zigzag, Stanley brought it to X-Ray. Zigzag followed. X-Ray looked at the tube, then rubbed his dirty glasses on his shirt and looked at the tube again. One by one, all the boys dropped their shovels to come and look. "It looks like an old shotgun shell," said Squid. "Yeah, probably something like that," said Stanley. He decided not to mention the engraved design. Maybe no one would notice. He doubted X-Ray could see it. "No, it's too long and too thin to be a shotgun shell," said Maggot. "It's probably just a piece of junk," said Stanley. "Well, I'll show it to Mom," said X-Ray. "See what he thinks. Who knows, maybe I'll get the day off." "Your hole's almost finished," said Stanley. "Yeah, so?" Stanley raised and lowered his shoulder. "So why don't you wait until tomorrow to show it to Mom?" he suggested. "You pretend you found it first thing in the morning. Then you can get the whole day off instead of just an hour or so this afternoon." X-Ray smiled. "Good thinking, caveman." He dropped the tube into his large pocket on the right leg of his dirty orange pants. Stanley returned to his hole. When the water truck came, Stanley started to take his place at the end of the line, but X-Ray told him to get behind Maggot and in front of Zero. Stanley has moved up one place in line. And that's where we end chapter 13. So let's find out what that is and if it is valuable and interesting to the warning. See you soon.